Thanks so much Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Cosmic Spectrum and I'm a freelance illustrator. On this channel, I share my process using various mediums and doing various types of work, and in this particular video, I'm going to share the process of this gouache study that I did a couple of months ago. So as some of you may know, if you are a regular on my channel, I've been doing some gouache studies this summer, and it's a medium that I haven't used too much before, and at this point I've done several studies here and there, and this is one of the later ones that I did. And the reason why I wanted to share this particular video with you is because it was a very difficult study for me to complete, unlike the previous ones that I've done. And I think it's pretty important to be able to share the really difficult experiences as well as the relatively smooth sailing ones. And so here we are. So this was a long battle for me because usually my studies don't take very long. The previous ones that I've done typically take something like an hour or an hour and a half at most, but this one took me maybe like 2 or maybe even 3 hours, unlike the previous ones. So the reason why it took forever is because there were so many things that I had to keep repainting and keep coming back to because it just was not looking the way that I wanted it to. And the struggles mostly came from being able to mix colors properly, doing things probably in the wrong order now that I think about it, and trying to paint on top, like layering the paint way too much to the point where it was very difficult to smooth it out and make it blend. So I will get to that once the footage catches up, but I started this study in the same way that I do all of them, which is to take a red Colerase pencil and just draw a pretty detailed but not overwhelmingly detailed sketch. As you can see, I mostly focused the line work on the body of the girl, and everything else I figured I just kind of figure out once I'm painting it, because it's not the focus of the image, and so I can kind of just make things up a lot more in the surrounding areas. And the first thing that I did after the sketch was done is put down some basic washes very lightly, just to get a basic gist of the colors and not to look at a completely blank page. That's something I've been doing for most of my studies, and I think it's a really good approach to start, because I think working from the most general colors towards more specifically rendered areas is kind of the way that I prefer it. I don't like just putting down paint on a white canvas. So yeah, here I kind of decided to tackle the background elements first on top there. For whatever reason, I think I was kind of delaying, honestly, working on the figure itself because I knew that it was going to be difficult, and so I decided to just kind of put a general sense of the background in first before moving into the face. I realized that the wash for the dark background I put was very light, but I kind of did that because I knew that it would be really difficult to paint lighter elements on top of a very dark color, and so I put down a lighter kind of gray wash and then added some of the colors that I saw in the flowers, and then went around with a much darker color to have them pop out more. And even though this took a little longer than I would have expected, I think this was probably the best approach that I could think of at the time, because I think in the end the effect was decent and I achieved kind of what I was going for. And so after I put down the basic gist of the background elements on the top there, I decided to just tackle the skin, even though that was something that was very kind of intimidating for me. I've always had a lot of trouble painting dark skin on paper with using traditional mediums, especially using more transparent mediums, but still it's pretty difficult for me to do even with an opaque medium, because I know that especially with gouache there are limits to how much you can paint things over, and I kind of started very lightly, but as you can see here, this is where I made the first mistake of mixing just the wrong color for the lighter areas of her skin, where I kind of saw this yellowish color, but I think it was more orange than I noticed, and so I think I just mixed a color that was too cool for the palette, and it immediately made it kind of look wrong to me. So I had to go back and keep mixing more and more skin tone colors in order to kind of go back and cover it up to fix the mistake that I made with that really light yellow that I put on top of her skin. And what I did was, after getting to a point where I wasn't sure what to do next, I decided to just tackle the darker areas around, because they would provide me with the necessary contrast so that I could see what possible next steps I should take in order to fix the colors that I used on the skin. So one of the difficult things about gouache, as some of you probably know, is that it does dry a different color than when it is wet, especially with lighter paint. So you can probably see this happening in real time, like when I put, or in the video, when I put down a color when it's lighter, as soon as it dries, it becomes significantly darker than the color that I initially put down. And so that's where a lot of the difficulties were coming from for me. I think with the face, I kind of managed to make it somewhat decent according to my standards, obviously, but when I started tackling the rest of the body, that's where the real difficulties came in, because I like to approach things in a little bit of an angular and a stylized way, using a lot of shapes, and for some reason I was just completely failing to do this with the skin. There was a lot of contrast there and a lot of really dark areas, with a very smooth blend into the lighter color next to it. And so I figured I would probably have to make this rendering more smooth than I typically prefer. And smoothing out those transitions between different colors turned out to be really difficult, especially with the darker paints. As you can see on her arm, I think maybe it's because at this point there were a lot of layers on that particular area of the paper, but the blending was just not very smooth and it kind of turned out grainy. I still don't really know why that happened, but this is definitely not the last of my tackling of the arm, and I'm going to come back to it eventually. Before I continue, I just wanted to take a quick minute to tell you about this video's sponsor. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes on a huge variety of artistic and creative topics that range from drawing, illustration, and animation, all the way to photography, self-care, productivity, organization, and tons more. It's the perfect place for curious people who love to learn new things, and there's no shortage of interesting topics to discover when you browse the platform. I've personally been using Skillshare for many years now, and I'm always delighted to see all the new classes constantly being added. I check out what new art and illustration classes there are, and I recently stumbled upon this one called Learn to Draw: Daily Practices to Improve Your Drawing Skills by Gabrielle Bricky. This class does a very good job at explaining the very essential skills that are required to be able to draw. It can be super difficult to explain these things to students or try to teach that, so it's always super interesting for me to see how other artists tackle that specific topic, and I think she does a very, very good job doing it. And if you're a beginner, or even if you feel like you need a quick refresher on the fundamentals, I would highly recommend checking out this super useful class. The first 1,000 people who use the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium. And now back to the video. So one thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that I will often leave an area unfinished and move on to something else. And I do this mostly because I tend to reach a point of frustration where I'm not 100% sure how to take any further steps in a given area without the context of the rest of the image, and so I will move on to a different area and kind of paint as much as I can there, and then go back to the area that I left behind, looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, I suppose, in some ways. And this I actually find very helpful. And I think that's how I was able to actually manage to complete the image in the end, even though it was giving me so many difficulties. Something I wanted to mention was the fact that I think the angle of the face ended up being a little bit different in my study than in the original photo that I was using as a reference. And I think it's because I just didn't do a good enough job in the sketching phase of this study to properly indicate the correct angle in the photo. But honestly, I don't know how much this actually matters in the end. Just figured I'd mention that as something I noticed when I was looking at it later on. As you can see, I am going back once again to tackle the skin to see if I can fix it. This is where I was having the most troubles, and I was feeling like I don't know if I even want to finish the study, because to me it was a complete flop. There were so many parts, so many like problem areas in the skin where I just kept failing to mix the right colors, and I was seeing that the colors were turning out quite different than from the reference photo. And at this point I felt like I went in too far with the wrong colors to be able to fix it, but thankfully I decided to persevere and just see, do my best and try to fix what I have. And it required many layers, which is why in the end I think the body actually ended up not being great. And if I had to go back, I would probably approach it a little bit differently. I think to some degree the warm tone that I laid down underneath everything did help, but for the most part, unfortunately, I think it got completely covered up in the end, and the warm glow that you see in the photo didn't really show through in my painting, which is something that I was kind of disappointed about. But regardless, once I got to the point where I was super frustrated with the body, I decided to just move on to something else. Like I mentioned, is how I tend to approach things. And so I just painted in the hair and decided to just tackle the rest of the missing background at this point so that I can go back and maybe figure out how to fix the body later on. So that's what I did. And I did approach the background in a pretty minimalistic way. I wasn't really trying to replicate exactly what I saw, just kind of abstractly putting in the colors in certain areas without really defining them too much. And yeah, this is something that kind of helped me visualize the complete version of this study, and that's why I decided to carry on, because beforehand, I don't know, there were so many unfinished areas, and the frustrations with trying to get the skin tone right and painting the skin really kind of got to me. So yeah, and at this point the face also is not quite finished, and I decided to go back to add some more depth and just a little bit more details to it later on. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that there were some things about this photo that were kind of strange. I think that's what kind of made it super difficult for me to paint. I think it must have been edited or something, because I don't know, just there's so much contrast. I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I should have just planned it out ahead better, but as you can see, I had a ton of problems with trying to blend the paint because of the amount of layers that I put on the skin at this point. And so I go back to the background and put in a lot of the green stuff that I left out at the beginning. That's something I planned to do later on anyways, and I thought this was a good point because I have put down most of the basic stuff, and going back and forth between the different areas is, something I already mentioned before. But yeah, so as you can see, I'm trying to blend out the skin now, and it's giving me some hard time. And so I decided to go back again to the hair and put in the little flowers that are in it. And for this, I actually used this kind of like a lazy technique where while the paint was still wet, I just went and used my finger to kind of use it like a little stamp and put it all over the place. And I think that saved me quite a bit of time. And I think it actually kind of created the desired effect that I was going for anyway. So that was just a quick hack. I do things like that sometimes. I do tend to use my fingers a lot, probably more than I should, because sometimes it doesn't really go the way that I want it to. But it worked out in this case, which is nice. So there I just put the finishing touches on her face, and I think in the end I did manage to get it to a point where I was relatively happy with it. Although I will say that the overall I guess impression that the study left for me was not the best. It's not really the kind of technique that I want to be going for, and so in the future I think I gotta be more mindful of how I decide to approach things and like what kind of rendering technique I'm going to be going for, because in the end I could not smooth out the skin areas properly to my liking, and so it looks super blotchy on her arm especially, and yeah, that's something I still don't really know what went wrong there. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I really wanted to share this one because I do consider it kind of not one of the best ones, and I don't want it to seem like everything is super easy for me, as I think that's like an effect that can happen when I upload a bunch of videos and only talk about, you know, how things work out and I guess show a result that looks decent. So this is one of the ones that didn't really go well, and I hope you enjoyed watching the process. And I'm personally looking forward to doing a lot more of these gouache studies because I find that I've been learning a ton by doing them, and I'm very excited to do some more. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!